Median home prices just hit an all-time high of $440,600 in July 2026. Not in San Francisco, not in Manhattan, that's the national median. And buying is now cheaper than renting in only about 2% of metro areas across the entire country. 2%. Today, we're getting into two ideas that could actually move the needle on this crisis: converting what oversized suburban homes into studio apartments and building what researchers are calling rural micro-suburbs. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why zoning is the hidden villain in this story, how these two strategies work in practice, and what it would actually take to pull them off. I've got someone here who's been deep in this research, so let's get into it.
The numbers really do set the stage here. We're not talking about a mild inconvenience. This is a structural crisis. Nationally, the housing shortage is estimated at 3.8 million units. In California alone, the estimate is 3.5 million additional homes needed to meet current and projected demand. And annual production is nowhere close to that target.
3.5 million just for California?
Just for California. And to put that in context, the median home price in California exceeds $800,000. That's more than double the national average. Median rents for a two-bedroom apartment surpass $3,000 a month in many urban areas. And over 25% of California renters are spending more than half their income just on housing.
Half their income. That's not a housing problem at that point. That's basically everything else in your life getting squeezed out. So what's actually driving this? Because I feel like we always hear not enough homes, but that can't be the whole story.
Right, it's layered. The research points to a few compounding factors. Restrictive zoning and land use regulations are a big one. They've historically limited the construction of multifamily and affordable units. Then you've got high land and construction costs, including labor and materials, which raise the barrier to new development. Lengthy permitting processes that can add months or even years to a project. And infrastructure limitations, inadequate water, sewer, transportation that constrain capacity, especially in rural and exurban areas.
So it's not one thing, it's like 5 things all happening at once.
Exactly. And demographic trends on top of that, population growth, migration, changing household structures, all continuing to fuel demand. So you've got supply being artificially constrained while demand keeps climbing.
Okay, so given all that, let's talk about the first big idea here: converting large single-family homes into multiple studio apartments. Because when I first heard this, I thought, wait, are we just talking about splitting up houses? Like, is that actually a real policy strategy?
It is, and it's more sophisticated than it sounds. The core insight is that many suburban neighborhoods are full of large single-family homes, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms, that are underutilized. Household sizes have been shrinking, kids move away, and you've got this massive amount of existing square footage sitting there. The conversion model proposes redesigning those homes into multiple self-contained studio apartments without needing new land, without demolition, without building from scratch.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
Typical scenarios include a 5-bedroom home converted into 4 studios, or a 4-bedroom reconfigured as 3 independent units. Basements and detached garages can also be transformed into additional housing. Each unit gets its own sleeping area, bathroom, kitchenette, and entrance. Or you can do a shared amenity model where residents have private bedrooms but share kitchens and laundry, which reduces per-unit costs even further.
And the cost argument here is that you're not starting from zero. You've already got the foundation, the roof, the exterior walls.
Exactly. The research frames it as urban recycling almost. You're reactivating what's already there, rather than building new sprawl. No land acquisition required, existing utility connections are already in place, and the permitting timeline can potentially be faster. The cost-to-income ratio for homebuyers is now at 35% nationally, so anything that brings more affordable units online faster matters.
I love that framing, urban recycle. It's a completely different mental model than we need to build more stuff. But here's my skeptic question. Can the infrastructure actually handle it? Like, if you suddenly have 4 households in a building that was designed for 1, doesn't the plumbing just give up?
That's the right question to ask, and the honest answer is it depends, and it requires planning. The research is clear that infrastructure capacity reviews need to be integrated into the permitting process. You have to assess water main capacity, whether existing pipes can handle higher peak flows. Wastewater, are the local sewer lines and treatment plants adequate? Electrical, converting one home into multiple apartments can significantly increase electrical loads, so panel upgrades and potentially transformer improvements may be necessary.
So it's not a free lunch.
Not at all. Fire safety is also critical. Smoke alarms, sprinklers, fire-rated separations between units, egress windows, emergency access has to be maintained. These are real constraints, but the argument is that they're solvable constraints, especially compared to the alternative of trying to build entirely new housing from the ground up in high-cost markets.
And this is where zoning comes in, right? Because even if a homeowner wants to do this, the rules in most places just don't allow it.
This is the crux of it. Traditional zoning codes in many communities restrict residential development to low-density single-family homes. Single-family-only zoning prohibits multifamily or subdivided units on most residential lots. Occupancy limitations restrict the number of unrelated individuals per parcel. Parking minimums mandate off-street parking spaces per unit, often exceeding actual demand. Density ceilings and minimum lot sizes limit how many units can exist on a given parcel. All of these work together to make conversions either illegal or financially unviable.
And here's something I find genuinely ironic about this. Single-family zoning wasn't invented to solve a housing problem. It was designed to keep certain people out of certain neighborhoods. And now it's one of the biggest structural reasons we can't solve the affordability crisis. Like, the tool that was used to exclude people is now excluding people from being able to afford a place to live at all.
That's a really important point. The research does note that these restrictions have been linked to racial and economic segregation by limiting access to high-opportunity neighborhoods, and now they're contributing to a broader affordability crisis that affects a much wider population. The policy response has been building, though.
What's actually changed on the policy side?
A few significant things. In California, SB 9 enables the construction of duplexes on single-family lots, and SB 10 allows cities to upzone properties near transit and job centers for multifamily development. Those are state laws that override local restrictions in specific contexts. And then at the federal level, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act was enacted in July 2026. It introduces over 40 supply-side provisions.
Wait, 40 provisions? What's in there?
It includes prohibitions on large institutional investors buying single-family homes, streamlining environmental reviews, expanding the definition of manufactured homes, and incentivizing municipalities to increase housing supply through grants and zoning reform guidance. The research notes that its impact will depend on effective implementation at the state and local levels, which is always the hard part.
Right, because you can pass a law, but if local planning departments don't have the capacity or the political will to implement it, it just sits there.
Exactly. And that's why the research emphasizes bundled reforms, combining multiple changes at once, like eliminating single-family zoning, reducing minimum lot sizes, and relaxing height restrictions together, rather than isolated tweaks. Isolated changes tend to get absorbed without much effect. Bundled reforms create real momentum.
Okay, so that's the urban side of this. Let's talk about the second big idea, rural micro-suburbs, because this one genuinely surprised me when I read about it. What are we actually talking about here?
So, rural micro-suburbs are compact residential clusters composed of tiny homes, modular units, manufactured housing, or even converted structures built on rural parcels. The key distinction from traditional large lot subdivisions is that they emphasize shared infrastructure, community amenities, and efficient land use. Think 10 to 50 compact housing units with shared roads, shared utilities, community spaces, and critically, broadband infrastructure.
Why rural specifically? What's the appeal there versus just building more in cities?
A few things. Rural land offers lower acquisition costs, which makes development more financially feasible. Larger parcel sizes allow for creative site planning, and in some jurisdictions, there are fewer regulatory constraints. The idea is to provide affordable housing near smaller communities and employment centers, which also supports local economies and addresses rural depopulation, which is a real issue in many parts of the country.
It's interesting because when you think about it, this kind of echoes historical patterns. Company towns, planned communities from the early 20th century, small, self-contained clusters built around shared infrastructure, just now with fiber optic internet and modular construction instead of a coal mine and a company store.
That's a fair parallel. And the modular and prefabricated construction angle is actually significant here. Factory-built components can be installed on new foundations, reducing construction time and labor costs. The construction industry faces persistent labor shortages, especially in high-cost regions like California, so anything that reduces dependence on on-site skilled labor is meaningful.
So you're not waiting for a full construction crew for months. You're essentially assembling something that's already been built elsewhere.
Right. And the research is pretty emphatic that for micro-suburbs to work, you need an infrastructure-first approach. Water infrastructure, whether that's municipal connections, community wells, or regional systems, has to be established before occupancy. Wastewater options include municipal sewer connections, cluster septic systems, or community treatment facilities. Roads need to be all-weather and provide emergency access. And broadband is specifically called out as critical for modern living and economic participation.
The broadband piece is interesting because if you're going to ask people to live in a rural cluster, they need to be able to work remotely, access telemedicine, have their kids do school online. Without that, you're not building a community, you're building an isolation pod.
Exactly. The research explicitly frames broadband as essential for education, employment, and telemedicine. It's not a nice to have, it's a prerequisite for the model to function. And the policy recommendation is to require broadband deployment as part of the development certification process, not as an afterthought.
Let me push back on something here, though, because both of these ideas, home conversions and micro-suburbs, sound great in a policy document. But there's always the community resistance piece. People don't want their neighborhood to change. They don't want more cars, more noise, more density. How do you actually get this stuff built when neighbors are going to fight it?
That's the political feasibility question, and the research doesn't pretend it's easy. The concerns are real: neighborhood character, traffic, utility capacity, noise. The research identifies what it calls NIMBY mitigation strategies, education campaigns that highlight the benefits of housing diversity, transparent planning processes with early community engagement, and inclusionary policies that balance new development with community needs.
Does that actually work, though? Because education campaigns sounds a little optimistic when someone's worried about their property values.
It's not a magic solution. The research is honest that coalition building and local engagement are key to overcoming resistance, but also that tailoring approaches to local context is critical. What works in one community may not transfer directly to another. The Los Angeles demonstration projects on streamlined permitting for home conversions had, quote, mixed results depending on local implementation. That's the honest assessment.
I appreciate that honesty, because I think one of the failure modes in housing policy conversations is overselling solutions. Like, just do this one thing and the crisis is solved. And that's never how it works.
The research is explicit on this. Neither strategy is a panacea. The conclusion is that both can play vital roles in a comprehensive housing supply agenda, but only if implementation is grounded in robust planning, stakeholder collaboration, and ongoing evaluation. There are monitoring metrics proposed, number of new units created, time and cost to completion, affordability outcomes relative to area median income, infrastructure performance, community satisfaction.
So it's not just build it and hope. There's an accountability structure built in.
That's the recommendation, yes. Adaptive management, using data to refine policies and address emerging issues. Regular reporting on program outcomes. Stakeholder involvement in evaluation. It's a framework that acknowledges these are experiments that need to be learned from, not just mandates handed down.
Let's talk about the economics for a second, because I want to make sure we're being real about who benefits and who bears the cost. Home conversions, who's actually doing this? Is it individual homeowners, developers, and who's paying for the infrastructure upgrades?
Both homeowners and developers are potential actors here. Homeowners can generate rental revenue through conversions, which supports long-term financial sustainability for them. Developers benefit from reduced expenses since much of the core building infrastructure is already in place. But the infrastructure financing piece is a real challenge. Upfront investment is required to upgrade or extend utilities, roads, and broadband. The research points to creative funding mechanisms, grants, loans, tax incentives, and public-private partnerships.
And the Federal Road to Housing Act has some of that built in, the grants and incentives for municipalities.
Right. And the research also recommends density bonuses and reduced fees for projects that meet affordability and sustainability criteria. The idea is to make the economics work for developers and homeowners without putting the entire infrastructure burden on them individually.
Here's something that struck me reading through all of this. The fact that buying is cheaper than renting in only about 2% of metro areas right now, that's a complete inversion of how most people think about the housing market. Like, the conventional wisdom has always been renting is temporary, buying is the goal. But if buying is financially out of reach for the vast majority of people in most cities, then renting isn't a stepping stone anymore. It's just where people live, permanently. And that changes what we need to build.
That's a really sharp observation. And it connects directly to why studio apartments and smaller rental units matter so much in this conversation. If the goal is homeownership for everyone, you build differently than if you accept that a large and growing portion of the population will be long-term renters who need quality, affordable, stable rental housing. The conversion model and micro-suburbs are both fundamentally rental-oriented strategies.
And the populations who benefit most, students, young professionals, retirees, single workers, those are exactly the people who are getting squeezed hardest right now.
Exactly. Smaller units typically rent for less than large apartments or single-family homes, making them accessible to those groups. And the equity dimension matters here too. The research notes that over 160,000 people experience homelessness on any given night in California. These aren't abstract policy numbers. There are real people on the other end of every unit that doesn't get built.
Let's talk about the environmental angle briefly, because I think it often gets left out of housing conversations. Is denser housing actually better for the environment?
The research says yes, generally. Higher density development can reduce per capita energy use and greenhouse gas emissions compared to sprawl. Sustainable building practices, energy-efficient appliances, renewable energy integration can further reduce environmental impacts. And there's a stormwater and wastewater management piece that needs to be planned for, but the overall environmental footprint of denser housing tends to be lower than continued suburban expansion.
So you're not just solving a housing problem, you're potentially reducing the environmental cost of housing at the same time.
That's the argument. And it connects to the micro-suburb model too. Shared infrastructure means shared environmental footprint. One community well, one cluster wastewater system, shared roads. The per-unit environmental cost is lower than if each of those households had their own large-lot single-family home with individual systems.
Okay, I want to bring this back to somewhere specific because the research specifically calls out Elk Grove and Sacramento County as places that face acute housing shortages and affordability pressures mirroring statewide trends. What does implementation actually look like in a place like that?
The research identifies both challenges and opportunities there. Challenges include fragmented governance, multiple agencies and jurisdictions that don't always coordinate well, infrastructure limitations, and community resistance. But the opportunities are real. State policy support through SB 9, SB 10, and now the Federal Road to Housing Act creates a framework that local governments can build on. And the research suggests that places like Elk Grove are actually well positioned to pilot both home conversion and micro-suburb models.
Pilot programs seem to be a recurring theme here. Like, the research isn't saying flip a switch and do this everywhere. It's saying try it, measure it, learn from it.
That's the honest approach. The implementation roadmap in the research lays it out in phases. Policy adoption at the state and local level, 6 to 12 months. Regulatory reform through planning departments and zoning boards, 12 to 24 months. Infrastructure planning as an ongoing process. Pilot program launch at 12 to 24 months. And then monitoring and evaluation continuously from there.
So we're not talking about a quick fix. This is a multi-year, multi-stakeholder process.
Right. And the stakeholder map is genuinely complex. Utilities, fire and emergency services, planning departments, housing agencies, community groups, developers, financial institutions, state and federal agencies. All of them have a role, and all of them have to be engaged. The research recommends early engagement with utilities and emergency services specifically because infrastructure constraints can kill a project before it starts if they're not identified upfront.
That's actually a really practical point. You can have the best zoning reform in the world, but if the water main can't handle the load, nothing gets built.
Infrastructure first is the phrase the research uses repeatedly. It's not just a slogan, it's a sequencing principle. You don't approve the housing until you've confirmed the infrastructure can support it. That protects residents, protects the broader community, and actually makes the projects more viable long-term because you're not building on a foundation that's going to fail.
So when you step back from all of this, the conversions, the micro-suburbs, the zoning reform, the infrastructure requirements, what's the through line? What's the thing that actually has to change for any of this to work?
The through line is that we have to stop treating housing supply as a problem that solves itself through the market and start treating it as something that requires active, coordinated policy intervention. The market alone has produced a 3.8 million unit national shortage and a situation where buying is affordable in 2% of metro areas. The tools exist: home conversion, micro-suburbs, zoning reform, streamlined permitting, infrastructure investment. What's been missing is the political will and the coordination to deploy them together.
And the research is pretty clear that no single tool is enough on its own.
Regulatory flexibility has to be paired with robust infrastructure investment.
Life safety standards can't be compromised in the name of speed. Environmental protection matters. Community engagement isn't optional, it's how you build the political durability that lets these programs survive beyond a single election cycle. The research calls it a balanced approach, and I think that's the right framing. It's not ideologically pure, but it's realistic.
Here's what I keep coming back to. We started with a number, $440,600. That's the national median home price as of July 2026, all-time high. And the solutions we've been talking about, converting a 5-bedroom house into 4 studios, building a cluster of modular homes on a rural parcel, they sound almost mundane compared to the scale of the crisis. But that might actually be the point. The crisis didn't happen because of one dramatic failure. It happened because of decades of small decisions, zoning rules, parking minimums, permitting delays that compounded into something enormous. And the fix might look the same way. A lot of unglamorous, incremental, coordinated decisions that add up to something that actually works.
That's exactly it. The research concludes that these strategies can contribute meaningfully to addressing the nation's housing crisis and building more inclusive, resilient communities, but only with thoughtful implementation and sustained collaboration. The solutions aren't waiting to be invented, they're waiting to be implemented.
The solutions aren't waiting to be invented, they're waiting to be implemented. That's a line worth sitting with. If you're in a city, look up your local zoning code, seriously, it's public record, and see what it actually says about converting a home or adding a unit. If you're a homeowner, the research suggests you might have more options than you think, especially as state laws like SB 9 continue to expand. And if you're just someone who's frustrated by rent prices or a housing market that feels impossible, now you know what's actually driving it and what the people trying to fix it are working on. Thanks for being here on Co-Pilot Podcasts.